All right.
Yeah.
So we're here today on the first episode of Good Stuff. So the idea is to have a bit of a dialogue on interesting things inside AI, just to chat about them and just explore some of the content that we've been working on over the last few months. So I'm Pete.
I'm Andy.
I'm Andy. Yeah, we're Other Stuff. This is the Good Stuff podcast.
The future of podcasting is going to be lo-fi.
Lo-fi, yeah. So we keep getting told we need a video, so we figured instead of looking at us, it might be nice to just enjoy the same view that we're doing, and you can just imagine you're here. So we sat City Beach in Perth, just
In the van.
in the back of a van, staring out at the sea. There you go. That's my foot. So now you know it's real.
I mean, that could be anyone's foot.
It could be anyone's foot.
We're in the back of a van.
That is true. If you've got a foot, do you want to just stick a foot out? There you go.
There
2
we go.
foot. 2 different feet. So this
Legit.
is most likely 2 different people there. So that's good. All right. So the subject today we were going to go over was, what is the business model of AI? So I think maybe the easiest way to think about this is to get into like where we think the value accrues in AI. Maybe we could do some statements up front. So do you think the value of AI accrues to OpenAI or somewhere else? What do you think, Andy?
No. I think we're going to see this shift to traditional service businesses. Businesses that like traditionally have like prefixed low margins because of a dependency on like language heavy workflows that require a lot of humans as like the medium of intelligence in the business. And I think the opportunity here for those businesses is to leverage AI to manage that language dependency and shift the unit of intelligence away from the human and toward this kind of infinite scalable unit of intelligence in AI. And that should unlock margin improvement in the business and efficiency and productivity. All of a sudden you have these kind of low margin traditional service businesses that are like the ugly ducklings of the business world. And they can essentially become like software type businesses with software style margins. And that's like where this value goes.
All right, I like it. I agree. I guess the way I think about this is the future is going to be hyper-localized with a lot more of the power and control in the hands of small businesses. And that's a future that I really like. So I'm very pleased to see what we can do to help bring that about. I think there's a lot of doom mongering about AI, and a lot of assumptions are that the way this plays out is that whoever has the most data or the biggest model is the winner, and because they have the most intelligent thing, it can do everything. And I think that's a falsehood. I don't think that's true. And I think that will play out, but I think you can see the idea there is even already you see a lot more like segmentation between what models people use for which particular outcome, how they manage context and data inside like a particular AI system. That just implies that it's not going to be one megalithic thing where we have a perfect model which is the best and that thing does everything. I think what we're more likely to see is a lot of niching down in the AI models and in the data sets that are required. But what it will do is create broadly available commodity intelligence that can be plugged into any business. And then the value will accrue to the people that have businesses that are useful, which is usually not middlemen, right? Like most of our traditional like larger businesses tend to be middlemen business that sell a product that is useful to everybody broadly on the globe. I think that style of business starts to go away. I think if you can create all of your own tools, I think you're more likely to create them locally and more specifically to the need that you have.
I mean, do you know what like I've been like oscillating on a little bit? I don't think we've really spoken much about this before, but the this like app layer question, you know, this like notion that SaaS is dead. And like, I think for a lot of SaaS, there's probably some merit to that thinking, especially if like what you're providing is essentially just another interface that you interrogate within your business, like it's part of a stack. But I do wonder if there is like some merit to the thinking that there is going to be this like app player renaissance where like you've got companies like Cursor that, you know, you just see this commoditization of models, but the app player is the thing that like captures the market. And yeah, I wonder if there's something to that in certain areas where, you know, these tools are like highly productive or highly enabling, and they just kind of, I mean, but the counter argument to this would be like, oh, you've got Windsurf, you got a bunch of IDEs, right? Like there's so much competition there. People like switch between them all the time. So I don't even know. Like I'm not even certain. Like, if there's truth to that line of thinking either. But I don't know. I feel like it is maybe like just completely doomerous to say like, oh yeah, all SaaS is dead. Like it seems like an absolute statement. But I do think you see a decline in a lot of the kind of like interfaces that you'd normally interact with in a business.
Yeah, I mean, the way I guess I think about that is, it's not that all SaaS is dead and therefore it dies right now. It's that there's a timeline to everything. So I think what you would see first is that if it becomes very cheap to build like whatever IT applications and systems that you need, then I don't think people make the trade-offs for SaaS, because SaaS is a set of trade-offs. And it's broadly, it works as a business model if you can sell your business, like if you can sell your one product on your one platform to a broad enough number of people everywhere in the world, and the internet open that up as an opportunity, then yeah, you can sell $20 to 1 million people and making $20 million a year. That's possible. But usually to do that, 1 million people have very different needs at the base level. And what you often see inside these businesses when you deliver on these platforms is that, you know, they might buy the platform for, I don't know, 500 grand a year, and then spend $2 million improving that platform. If you were somebody like, say, you know, like a larger enterprise business that was putting one of these things in, that is not unheard of. Now, a lot of the smaller businesses would buy the platform and just deal with it and run with whatever process they have, and then usually around that they end up just implementing a set of additional processes inside spreadsheets or elsewhere that then manage for all the gaps inside the SaaS platform. So all of a sudden the SaaS platform doesn't really do what you wanted. It just does the sort of 50% that gets you partway there, and it's kind of worth it, but it's kind of not.
And then you buy something else,
and then you do something else and something else, and you'd often see people have this like spread of different systems. And it just now they need to run those systems, and they're locked into those things. They have to do things in a particular way that is not necessarily the way that they would do them. And so I think that starts to go away once people can build things. But if people can build stuff, then you end up with that, as you say, like a more app layer question where you say, okay, well, so this is why Cursor's great, because it gives everybody the ability to go and build those things. But I think more and more that ability will just get abstracted away from requiring coders. So Cursor works right now because the people that are doing this are engineers and product-based people that are somewhat technical. And so like an IDE that integrates with all the tools is probably the place to put that stuff. But I think, again, longer term, the thing that drives it is going to be a chat style interface and data that's made available to these agents. And there's no real reason that needs to be in any sort of IDE. I mean, the Replit experience, again, is quite different and quite nice. You really, you know, a lot of what you're seeing is the code is there and you can inquire it, but it also will write the app, run the app, and then just show you the app as you're going. And if you've got that ability, then why would you bother looking at the code? You just look at the output and see what's going on. So,
but I think it also depends on like what the actual output is that you're looking for from that app layer, right? Like a lot of stuff I could just see being agentic because the app layer just creates busy work within the company. And so if you can eliminate that, or there's like an agent or agent swarm actually providing that output on a continuous and repetitive basis, then what need do you have of the app layer? So maybe it's like there's a strategic question about like which apps in which spaces. Is it just enterprise? Is it consumer?
So I think the nuance here is it's not that apps go away. it's the apps that are the same app for everybody in the world,
Yeah.
I think, go away. And I think what you end up with is more unique, local, homegrown apps that are more tightly coupled to what a business is actually doing. Because as always, if I'm, well, in almost any business around the world, from large enterprise to SME, like the value driver is not Gmail. Gmail is an overhead to what you're doing. It's not spreadsheets that are actually a core part of, well, maybe for an accounting firm, but they're not like the core part of the value stream. They're just things that you use to make it happen. And I think as you start to build systems that actually follow like the value stream and automate it, then I think you'll even work around a lot of these SaaS platforms, because really a SaaS platform is like or any computer program, it's like a predefined interface to get a human to do some work in the process.
Yeah.
Like the process will run, and every now and again you need humans to take action. So there'll be a set of tasks inside this system, and the human will come along and process those tasks. And if you don't need a human to do that task necessarily, then you never need to render it inside a UI and build like a flow or any of the design work around it. And so I think a lot of that stuff starts to disappear.
So you're saying like the process there is often superfluous because it's a result of the tech stack. It's not necessarily engineered for efficiency.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
And I think what really matters in this transition is engineering for the efficiency. So.
There's like a lot of like first principles thinking. Like, I think that's maybe the challenge here as well, because that's going to be like, you don't necessarily have that skill set within the business, right? The ability to go back to first principles and reimagine the process as it should be, and how to acquire that end state with AI. Like, that's a whole other skill set again. So there's the business process thinking, there's the technical AI ability as well. Because the risk here is that you just inevitably go, okay, we need AI, here's like another tool off the shelf, and you just add to your already bloated tech stack. And instead of it being like an efficiency driver, it just ends up creating more inefficiency and more touch points for people to interact with, and less interoperable. So I guess the question is, there's like a risk and an opportunity if you take the right path versus the wrong path with AI.
I think yes, like with everything. Yeah. So, I mean, to just maybe like focus again on, like, the question would be like, what's the business model of AI? And so maybe we're talking a little bit about like the impact here is, we think that SaaS is dead. We think like value goes to the edge. So like, what is the business model?
Yeah.
And I think to get back to that, like, that business model is best defined as it's a very traditional business model. Like, it's the business model is not the AI. The business model is the business.
Yeah.
It's what you will have in a future with broadly deployed AI is very efficient businesses that run with very few people involved, and that you would want to bring humans in to the business, like where you need them, but only at the point of need.
Yes.
And so what you have is very human light businesses that run themselves. So I think the business model of AI is lightweight businesses that can be very, very large and very efficient.
What's a good example of that?
I don't know if there's like one necessarily that's deployed right now, but I guess in terms of examples, I would think about like, what are the heuristics for what would make like a good AI native business. And it would be something where you would take a large like language heavy component. So is a lot of the work being done with language in, language out as an input and an output? And then are there people inside that process? So the labor component we look at next would be like, so the people that are involved, is there a large number of people involved? And if so, are they translating this language in, language out?
Yeah. So large number of people doing similar roles.
Yep. Yeah. And if you've got, I mean, that's important, right? Because if you've got the similar role, what you're really saying is that this is a role that's defined enough that I effectively have a job spec or a checklist or a set of procedures or different things that tell somebody when they come in how to act in this role. And if you have the ability to tell a person how to act in a role, well, you have almost everything you need to start automating an agent into that role as well. And so how would the agent act? What do they need? What's the information? What sort of training? What sort of guidance? How do they know if they've done the work properly or not? Like, this all is very important to AI agents and how you'd actually implement them. So we'd have a large number of people doing language heavy work that's somewhat standardized in its process. And then I think the final heuristic you'd want to look at is, like, we term the load over the system. So if you look at those processes that are people and language heavy, you know, what sort of representation do they, what sort of coverage do they account for inside the business? So is this 10% of the cost of the business? Is it 80% of the cost of the business? And the higher the number, the more likely you are to build a really efficient business out of that. So you can take a lot of cost out of a business that is 80%. So I think this does come to all businesses, though, in the sense that all businesses have these components to them. Like, a lot of the work that people do is the language heavy, that heavy work. It's the managing of, like, almost anything else that gets done. You know, a lot of, like, manufacturing processes have been automated for a long time, but the thinking about how to optimize them, or the products, or what to develop, has all been human. But I think a lot of that also becomes automated by just different versions of machines. So yeah, so I don't know, like, good product categories you might want to look at the moment. I think a lot of software development will become automated like this. I think, you know, we've used this example a lot, would be legal discovery. Here you have something which is very much language in, looking for, like, specific answers to questions, and as part of that discovery process, like, this is all just large scale language processing. So I think
because
like
it's a well-established process, unlike, say, just legal work in general. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So essentially the big opportunity then for these, like, more traditional service businesses with pretty significant OpEx that is largely made up of, like, wages and, like, a non-wage labor expense, right? The opportunity there is to go and collapse as much of that OpEx as possible by using AI. But does that just necessitate that you need to go and, like, get rid of a bunch of jobs in an organization, and that's the future? Or is there, like, you know, the trade-off here is, like, what does it enable? It's like this, like, augment versus automate debate. It's like, what's the real source of value in the business? Like, in the short term, if you collapse the OpEx in a traditional service business, you've just gone and significantly increased the enterprise value of that business, because now the margins are significantly higher than they were, and significantly higher than, like, basically all of its peer competitors that operate in a kind of more traditional model. So that seems like it would be very attractive and very lucrative, but isn't necessarily, like, you know, that's the approach all businesses should take now, because it just seems like it's a very I don't know, we're just going in and getting rid of a bunch of jobs and improving the value of the company. But is that the right model? Is that the right approach for every business? Probably not.
I mean, I don't know if it can be stated whether it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
So I think that's more of a normative claim that we're making there, right? Where I think what matters is, like, it's really more about, like, does it happen or does it not happen?
Yeah.
And then in the same way that it's not right or wrong that the internet came along, and if you didn't have an approach to the internet, then you went out of business. That's just sort of like what happened as technology developed. So I think that, like, yes, like, it's a lot of people, like, a lot of jobs get displaced in this. I think there's two ways that it could play out, which is either you take an organization, let's say it has 20 people. It's very likely that an organization at that size is constrained in their ability to grow, because adding the 21st person is actually quite a large capital investment for a company of that size. And so they can't grow anymore because they're constrained by the number of people in the business, and they've got to a point where they've added enough people that it's actually now difficult to add any more to drive growth.
Mm.
If you took like an AI native version of that business, what you would find is that you're going to remove that growth constraint on the business. So all of a sudden, if like the next like nominal client that you onboard doesn't actually cause you any more additional pain, or like you don't need more people hired in order to service that client, and you can just run it through a process, then you just don't, you just take off the gloves from a growth perspective.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden you can just scale up and up and up. So it could be that 20 person business can now do 10 times the amount of clients, and that actually gives you enough efficiency that instead of trying to shrink your balance sheet, shrink your cost base, you instead just grow your top line. You just have the same output, which is that you have a very efficient business with like a high profit margin, but still the same number of people. Now that's potentially the use case of a 20 person business. Now a 20,000 person business, like the next negligible person is just, it doesn't matter. Like they can hire another person, they can hire another 100 people, and they won't really notice it on the bottom line. But for those people, I think it's very unlikely that you're just going to massively grow like 10x at that point. You know, your growth was probably already unconstrained from the number of people, or you were just, you know, in an industry that like that's just how it was done at that sort of scale, and you have different efficiencies from that scale that allow you to do it. But I think in that industry, you're likely to have to get rid of people. I mean, this is why, like, one of the main drivers, I think, that the value flows to the smaller business. I think it's going to be quicker and easier for a small business to capitalize on this, because all of a sudden they can
well, they're more nimble, right?
Yeah,
They
they're
can
more
move
nimble,
faster.
right? It's easier to not fire people than it is to fire people, frankly. That's the quick way of putting it. Or maybe less polite is, if I'm in a 20,000 person business and I need to remove 10,000 people, and I'm based in Perth, for instance, and I'm Rio Tinto, like that's hard. Like you can't do this without sending political shockwaves. You're going to have like governors on your doorstep, like everyone's going to be on the phone asking what's going on, it's going to be in the press, and it's going to be all sorts of problems. If I'm a 10 person business and I need to double my revenue, nobody gives a shit.
Yeah,
like
so
I can
true.
just do it.
Yeah.
So I'll have the capability to do it and the ability to do it, and I don't need to ask anybody's permission to do it. Versus the other version, when you're trying to remove people, it's going to be quite difficult.
Yeah.
So I think that's the major difference there.
Well, I almost feel like it won't matter to some degree, because let's just say you are company A and your competitors are company B and C, right? Let's say you've augmented your 20 person team with AI and you're getting some, let's say, some revenue growth, right? But then you figure out, I could go from 20 people to 10 people pretty much overnight and maintain that revenue growth now, because we've just got so much efficiency out of these agents, right? Companies B and C will probably have to do the same thing. It's like, at that point, it's terminal, right? It's like we have to do the same thing in order to get the same level of revenue growth and to be competitive enough to match them on costs. Because if they go and, cut their OPEX in half, then they have pricing power, and they can leverage that pricing power to get that revenue growth. And so it kind of will just become this spiraling effect, right, where everyone else will have to follow suit.
I think so. I think it's a game you have to play.
Yeah.
Like the way you lose this game is to not play. It's like you're entered. It's like it's like the internet coming online, right? That was a game where you didn't get to decide if you wanted to play at having an internet presence in most businesses. If you didn't understand what it was and you didn't take advantage of it, you lost revenue and you couldn't operate as efficiently. I think the same will be true of AI to a certain extent.
Yeah.
It's, you need to understand, like, well, what does the future look like? Where does it impact on my business? And then how do I take advantage of it? And everything that I've seen in the last year of being involved in the space has been that the way this plays out is not people sat in front of ChatGPT asking it to do its job. It's that you redesign the business to be AI native first. I think, we'll probably go into these future episodes, but I think there's like broadly two ways of deploying AI into the business, which would be the bionic human or the human at the edge. As the two different deployment models. And like the bionic human is the person with all the tools. It's any individual person can be 10 times quicker if they have access to these tools, and a lot of us have experienced that already. But I think the real value is when you just don't even assume that the person has to drive the process forwards. Like we're going to get into the era of very aggressive, like Lean Six Sigma style process improvement. Where what you really see is, people that design businesses AI first. The business will just run, the process will just run, and then the humans will come in around the edges when they're required. Now, to do that, there's a lot of different, like technology elements, platforms that need to be in place. You need to think about your processes. You probably need to re-engineer them to look differently, like it's a different set of processes that you would use. But I think that's just how it plays out.
And of course, like that's when you see this proliferation of like very small businesses, the 1 and 2 man bands that are AI native. They can still be pretty large businesses, but there's almost this hyper-locality to it as well, where you just end up serving a kind of smaller, more targeted client base where you've got, existing networks or existing relationships with people, because the moats have just been completely eroded.
I think so, yeah. Like it's if I have all the intelligence available to me in Perth to deliver something that previously I needed to go to San Francisco for, why would I bother going to San Francisco when everybody's here? I may as well buy it from the person I know, like, and trust. And I think that buying behavior of like, I want to buy from people I know, like, and trust doesn't go away. Like that's a very human thing. So on the assumption that it's still people that have the capital, then I think we still buy in that way.
So there's this like bifurcation that occurs. Is that what you're saying? Like there's like a bunch of small businesses, almost micro businesses, but with like essentially like human network effects. And then there's really large businesses, the Woodsides of the world, that just keep pumping stuff out of the ground and shipping it overseas. And
I don't know. I mean, it's not so obvious to me that a business like at the size of like a Woodside or Rio Tinto still survives in their current incarnation. I mean, I think it probably depends on what the drivers are of needing to be that size. I think broadly it tends to be more of a political driver that makes businesses that big. Like, I personally don't really believe in the notion of efficiencies of scale, and I think anybody that's worked in one of these large enterprises would look at it and go, this thing's not efficient. Like there's no efficiency in scale. Like maybe in like a purchasing component, but even then, like that's not what drives the bottom line. I think it's usually that you almost become like a granted monopoly. Usually these are industries that require like huge amounts of regulation in order to operate in, and therefore only a few people can actually raise the funds to have access to the capital, or can manage the ongoing compliance costs to get in. And you often see with these businesses, what they'll do is they'll get in, establish a base, and then they'll wrap compliance and barriers to entry around that industry so as to protect it. You saw Sam Altman try the same thing with AI. As soon as they had like a vague lead, he was right up in front of Congress. Please regulate us, like give us loads of regulation. Like because nobody else can compete
pull the
then
ladder
except
up behind you.
for the big players. Again, I think one of the interesting things about AI is your ability to respond to regulation doesn't become a hiring problem. It becomes an access to technology and quite commoditized technology problem. So all of a sudden, I think that barrier will disappear as well. So it's not obvious to me that those larger companies don't start to break down, because a company that is, instead of it being 100,000 people, it could be 50,000 people. Could be 10,000 people and still provide the same sort of services from an operational point of view. So why would you not have smaller operations start to come along? So I think it would take a long time though. But I think the real value goes towards the smaller business. Like that's where I think you've got an almost outsized advantage to be able to take advantage of this switch. Is that you don't, if you're a small business, you don't even have to get rid of people.
Yeah.
All you need to do is have a business model that already works, the ability to create new clients, and then to take the brakes off growth.
Yeah.
Like if you can grow without growing your salary base, that's the dream of most
Exactly. Yeah.
small business. So
Yeah, because like right now, if you have that language and labor intensity, then you're essentially constrained by labor growth, right? You need to throw more people at a thing in order to provide that service beyond a certain scale, and there's diminishing marginal returns after a point, and so the incentives don't align. You may as well not actually grow past that point, and you're just in a holding pattern at that stage. So there is this really big unlock. Like the follow-up question would be, if you're running a small business, let's say you're running a small business of 20 people, it's that kind of size. What do you do? What do you do today?
you go talk to other stuff.
Yeah. Shameless plug.
I don't know. I mean, so what would I do? Like, what I would be thinking is, all right, how is this going to affect my business? Like, you know, what does this look like in the future? And I'd want to learn and understand what would an AI native business look like? What does my industry look like? Where do I think it's going to change? And then to understand that, I'd look inwards and I'd say, right, well, what are my business processes? Like, what is my, core value stream here? What are the support elements of the business versus what's actually driving value for my customers? And I'd look at each of them through that lens of language, labor, and load. And I'd be thinking, like, okay, well, how much of my business is actually made up of decision points and human intervention, where I apply intelligence by sticking people in a process and telling them to do stuff, and then I would look at automating it. Because I think what you have, it's hard to do this without like a good visual, but it's like, we've talked amongst ourselves a lot about this idea of like the value trap, whereby we have effectively like a set revenue and a set cost base. And what you might have is the revenue base might be 100 units in a business, and the cost base might be 90. And you would just go along forever, and that would be quite a normal business. And maybe it grows sometimes and shrinks sometimes, but it's roughly around that base. And what's likely to happen with AI is that some people will come along inside your industry and their cost base will go from 90 to 20. And if that happens, it means that person is now making 80 units of profit versus your 10 units of profit, which means that they could undercut you on price all day long, and they could steal all your customers. And the general view of like free markets and technology is that will happen if that's available as an option, because that person can then grow their market share. So I think that's likely to drive a lot of behavior in there. So you say, okay, well, what do I need to do to avoid that? The real answer is that be the person that does that.
Yeah, exactly.
If your costs are already at 20 and then theirs go to 20, then that's great. You go, okay, well, you can try and compete on price, but I can absorb it and I'll still be here and you'll survive. And that's like step one in this process.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is that everybody in the industry does that and takes that cost down to 20, then your ability to charge money is going to get eroded, because everyone's going to fight on pricing power to get more market share. So all of a sudden, it might be that your revenue line goes from 100 to 30.
Yeah, but I don't think that's linear though. The more I think about it, the more I think it's actually a really messy transition. So what you're describing, right, is you've got this phased approach to value capture, and businesses that adopt these kind of agentic processes early will actually see two things occur. Their revenue will grow and their OPEX will fall. And their revenue grows because their OPEX falls, because now they have pricing power and they can throw that pricing power at the market. And then essentially they've got this huge margin expansion and like huge increase in enterprise value relative to their peer competitors. And the peer competitors now have a choice, either to do the exact same thing or to essentially suffer a slow decline and failure over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other element is that you just get new entrants into that space to come along and compete away those excess returns, because that's what you're just going to see. If there's an opportunity to capture excess returns, a bunch of players will look at that, not just the incumbents. And so I think that's where the linearity might break over time. The existing players might just, fail to do this, fail to execute.
Yeah.
And the challenge then for the company that led on this is where the value trap kicks in, is over the kind of longer arc of time, let's just say it's 5 years, that revenue, which might have grown from 100 units to 120 units, and the cost, which was at 90 units and fell to 20 units, is that now 5 years later, the cost is still at 20 units, but the revenue is at 30 units. So you've had this mean reversion over time. And then the question is, like, what does that do to that business? You've ended up with similar margins to where you started, way less revenue than you previously had, nowhere near the costs that you had. But there's the question of enterprise value. It's like, what happens to the enterprise value?
I don't disagree with any of that. I think that's true. I mean, my only point is that the value gets competed away.
Yeah.
So you create the value early.
Mm-hmm.
You need to look at a way to capture it.
Yes.
But it doesn't last forever because of competition. That's almost the beauty of free markets, right? Is that this is, again, it's another reason why this doesn't go to a single player. Because otherwise one player with capital now could come in and just scoop up everybody's business. And then they now have monopoly pricing power for into eternity. But you don't.
Yeah.
If you have free markets, then it sorts itself out, because the pricing power of that industry gets demolished by the new entrants that would come in and do it. I think there is a question, like, is it the new entrants that drive that? Is it your competitors? Well, it's probably both. The fact is, it's going to be such a compelling difference in cost base to deliver the same service, but one that requires people to be paid living wages and one that doesn't. It's a huge difference. And so I don't think you see a world where people don't take advantage of that as an arbitrage. And as we both know, that there are people doing this. There are people doing this personally, and there are funds set up to buy companies in order to execute this as a strategy. And so, like, I think this is coming either way. I think it comes in both forms. I think it comes as new entrants to businesses, and it comes as your existing competitors. But I think, as always, what you would want to be is the person that did it early.
Yes.
The bit that where you get caught out, I think, is that it's not that your ability to charge will diminish day one. I think you're right when you said 5 years. Obviously, we've talked about this a lot as being like broadly how long we think that takes to play out, and I think 5 years is quite reasonable.
I agree.
And I think I would look at this and say, what you might see is within 3 years, the costs start falling as people become more competitive. It becomes very commoditized, and more people enter the industries. Then, you're going to start getting compressed. Now, if that plays out, then what you need to be thinking about is, like, well, what are my costs at that point in time? So if your costs have dropped low enough, then you can adjust to that pricing power change. But if they haven't, then you're kind of screwed. That's the point at which you go out of business. So I think the very real risk that you run in not looking at this stuff is not that you get made. You don't go out of business like day one just because somebody else has then implemented like a system that's lower cost than you. But I think you might go out of business very quickly at the point where the competition heats up in a couple of years. So really you want to get your house in order before that point, in order just to remain alive.
Well, that's the question, right? Because I think, so the risk from new entrants is a real one. And like, I think the challenge for a lot of incumbents, like, and I just mean that as any business that exists in the existing paradigm, the challenge for the incumbent is, how do you shift away from a business model that is designed for business as usual to a completely different model that requires first principles thinking? So I almost think about this as like the kind of the Netflix approach, right? It's like early on, they were physically mailing out DVDs. That was the business model. And they sensed that on the horizon there was this opportunity in streaming. And so they built this, incubated this business off to the side.
Mm-hmm.
That requires a different set of skills. It requires a different a different vision. It needs like product owners. I think that's the challenge. That's the shift in thinking that is required from incumbents sometimes here. It's going to be like, okay, well, we need to actually position ourselves for the future, and that might mean getting back to first principles and building the digital twin of our business off on the side and incubating it to one day take over the core business. And the core business is the bit that we just deprecate over time. And I wonder if that's the strategy for a lot of businesses, if they're the incumbent and they're worried about what's this going to do for market share, like what's this going to do for our customers? Because there is a risk there, right? It's like you could go and essentially re-architect a lot of the processes within the business, but there's a human, there's a real customer at the other side of that business, and you don't want them to necessarily be impacted negatively by it. Obviously, if it increases like the customer experience in some meaningful way, then great, that's awesome. But if it doesn't, or there's a risk that it might not, then you could see some reluctance to go and build in this tech. So that's maybe how I would be thinking about it if I was running a business with like 20 odd people. It's, is there an opportunity to build out the V2 of our business off on the side and incubate it and have it succeed over the long arc of time? That'd be the way I think about it. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like we've talked about this. Like I absolutely agree. I think that is
beautiful.
Is like a core. It is the problem, right? Is like, how do you manage the disruption? Like, is this going to be disruptive? Yes, I'm sure we'll go through several episodes where we convince you of that fact for anybody if anybody ever listens to any of this. But like, how to deal with it is a question, right? And like, we have seen this where Netflix is obviously a great example of a company that took a brick and mortar style, like mail order style business and transitioned it into the internet. And a lot of businesses failed to do that. Blockbuster, notably, as their competitor. And the way, as you said, they did it was by creating a separate business entirely, just to rethink it from scratch. And they were very successful in doing that. There's certainly other businesses that just adjusted as they went. Some, the impact was slightly different. And so it wasn't like, they could just roll with it a little bit and just adopt tools as they came.
Yeah.
Like, I do think that that's going to be a little bit different in this transition. I don't think that the way this plays out for people is that it's like a tool that you pick up and you need to use. I think it is a little bit more fundamental, that it probably involves like a rethinking of the business model.
Yeah.
Like, that's, again, like what we're seeing is a lot of interest and funds being raised to acquire businesses and effectively rethink their business model.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
build them AI native. I think if you don't want to go down that path of acquisition, then your next best option is, all right, well, how do I start the version of this business that is AI native day one? Because then you're not even necessarily acquiring all the costs. You're just creating a fresh blank piece of paper.
Yeah.
First principles, you can think of, how would I deliver this in a different way at a minimal cost? And then you're most likely to arrive at that low cost place in the future that's going to help you on this curve through the value trap. Now, it might be that then once you've got that view of the world, maybe you can transition your current business to it. Maybe you just transition the customers of your current business to it.
Yeah.
Maybe it changes the ownership structures of those businesses. That's all to be
maybe
figured out.
customer changes, right?
Yeah, could be.
The customer that was ordering DVDs online is probably not the same as the one that's embracing streaming straight away.
Yeah.
Potentially. I think the other thing is, like, there is a paradigm shift that business owners need to go through. Like, right now, a lot of business owners are thinking about, like, how do I just give everyone in my team access to ChatGPT Enterprise and just point them at it and let them go and figure out how to use it? And I guess that's the thing that we're saying is not where the opportunity is for the business. That's just another layer on top of the stack. So maybe it's just, there's a there's a moment here where people need to go, oh, actually, I just need to rethink this from first principles.
Yeah,
What's the AI native version look like?
I know when I used to do a lot of sort of Lean Six Sigma work back in the UK in process engineering. We often used to talk about it as like it's like speeding up the conveyor belt in the manufacturing plant, sort of. You know, it's like if you've got a particular process and people are working in a particular way, then you're going to go and throw these tools at it, and those people can work slightly quicker. But what you haven't really done is understood where the bottlenecks are in that process and what's stopping it running and scaling better. And so they're just slightly different approaches. Like I think you'll get a lot of benefit from providing ChatGPT and a set of tools to the people in your business, but what you haven't done is dealt with any of the issues that you've got that are a result of people running the processes. So the fact that they all stop at 5 p.m. or we're in Perth, right? So they all stop at 3:30 or 2 and then they head down south for a 5-day weekend. So it's like, there's issues there. Like people are off sick. People need to hand over to other people. Like when you do a handover from one human to another human, it's very lossy, right? When you hand over from one computer program to another computer program, you can more or less define exactly what that handover looks like. Yeah. These are very different things. They can run all night. They can run all day. They can
never get tired, never get sick.
They never get tired, never get sick. It's just a different workforce. So the idea that you would accidentally just define your process in exactly the same way, if you didn't have to think about the humans first, then I just don't think that's likely the answer. So I think it is more of a fundamental change. Yeah, and that's why it needs that first principles thinking.
Yeah, I think the other thing that you touched on there that I think is really interesting is where the human shifts in the process, right? I think that is like an insight that maybe not too many people have cottoned on to yet. Human right now is like the central part of the process, and if you want to do more in that process, you throw more humans at them. But what we're saying is that the human essentially shifts to the edge of the process. The core of the process can be, not just run agentically, but even architected and orchestrated by agents, right?
Yep.
And then the human just shifts off to the side to do the bits that, is maybe not where there's value for an agent to do. The bits in the real world, potentially, that the human becomes the interface with the real world for the agent. I think that's maybe like a really interesting shift that may occur, but that could also be really messy because it's, you're essentially then also shifting trust, right, in a process. Like you're running a business. It's like, I trust the people to do the thing, maybe because I've trained them to do it, or maybe because they've done the thing in the past, and now what we're saying is that the machine can do it better, more effectively. You can scale the workforce infinitely, I guess, to a degree.
I mean, I don't even think they need to do it better. They just need to be considerably cheaper.
Yes,
and it's worthwhile as long as they can get the same rough level of output, but at like 1% the cost. Why would you not do that?
Exactly.
Like it's going to become a no-brainer because somebody else will do it to your business. It's the competitive pressure is going to drive it. But yeah, I agree. I think with the I mean, as you know, I did a talk a couple of weeks ago over in Victoria at this, and one of the common pieces of feedback I got quite a lot was I had not considered that notion of like just moving the human to the edge. That's like a complete mental shift for me in how I was thinking about this, and fuck me, it's going to change a lot of stuff. And it's like, yes, it is. I think we come back to that on another. I think that's a whole topic in itself that we can get into. Is like, what's the difference between the bionic human and the human at the edge, and what does it look like, and like why is it going to be so much more appealing to run human at the edge than bionic humans? But I think from a business model point of view for today, I think it's fair to say that like there are huge cost savings if you run AI first business as opposed to an AI native business where you assume that the intelligent work is being done by AI agents as opposed to humans, and then you bring humans in when you need them.
Is it worth touching on this opportunity then for capital allocators? Because I feel like we've maybe touched on it briefly. You know, there's this private equity model here, but I guess the way I would classify these two opportunities, one is like you're a business owner and the other is you're a capital allocator. And like, the opportunity for capital allocators is to basically take the technology advantage, buy the business, collapse the OPEX in that business, drive up the revenue, and then you own an enterprise that has just unlocked a bunch of enterprise value relative to your initial investment. And so that creates a whole new class of investments, essentially, within a part of the market where, I mean, we're talking about traditional service businesses. These are not generally the kind of the shining examples for, you know, capital allocators, you know, VCs to go after, because they're not infinitely scalable. They are constrained by labor. They are very expensive to run. So I think there is this like new model, this product-led or transformational private equity approach that is emerging. And you mentioned there's a few people doing this already. But yeah, like where do you see that opportunity? How do you see that playing out?
I mean, again, this is probably like a big subject that we could do a lot of.
We'll do a whole other episode on it.
But like, yes, like I think you just outlined it very well, which is that if you can make these OPEX compressions, you unlock huge enterprise value. So what you would expect to see is a lot of private equity and like VC firms figuring this out.
Yeah.
And then looking at that as a model. So obviously we know that that is a thing because we're involved with firms that are looking to purchase businesses and then pull this strategy on them. So like, if anybody's listening and you have a business and you think, you know what,
yeah, I could do
I would sell my business for this, I would like to be involved, then let us know.
Yeah.
And we can help you with the diligence and introduce you to the people. But it's like, yes, like I mean, we know that that exists. I don't know how well known that is in the industry. I think there's been reports of KKR raising funds for this express purpose.
General Catalyst.
Yeah, we know sort of Brian from Kraft has talked about this on his blog. That was almost, a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Like, this is not an unknown opportunity amongst large private equity houses and large VC firms.
I think the part that may be less obvious is this like value trap that we talked about. Right? Yes. It's like, if you look at a business, especially a service business, and you go, I can collapse the OPEX in this business by, 40, 50, 60%, right? Like, every business looks really seductive if you're a capital allocator. But when we talked about like this mean reversion over time, like let's say 5 years down the line, and all of those excess returns have been competed away, like where does your enterprise value end up? You may end up with a company that is worth less than what you paid for it.
Yeah, despite initially being worth tons more.
Yeah, so this is
definitely the trap.
There's like a question here around moats, but I think that's probably the subject of an entirely new episode.
Well, let's tease it and say like what you've done there is you haven't invented. It looks for a moment like you've invented the money printing machine, which is the company that runs at like a ridiculously low OPEX for very high revenues. But what you've really done is created a massive pain in the arse for yourself because there's no real technical moat to what you just did, and other people move in and compete that away.
Yeah.
So what you really have is still valuable, but it's not valuable in terms of a forever money printing machine. You've invented a high like leverage arbitrage opportunity, effectively. And so the question then becomes, how do you take advantage of that arbitrage opportunity? And like, if you want, we can tell you exactly how to take advantage of that arbitrage.
Let's answer that in episode 2.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Like, we don't need to worry about that. So maybe we do episode. I mean, like, I think like all good lo-fi podcasts, you should do all the business on air.
Yeah.
But maybe episode 2 we get into the value trap, and like what we could do is actually maybe have like a whiteboard. I thought about this. Like, I've got a bunch of like. Well, Bethan's got a bunch of travel whiteboards. About this big. We could throw one of those up in front of the camera and just draw the thing on.
Yeah.
And then if we ever have like little ideas, we can sketch them out. That could be a good way of doing that.
Yeah, well, we don't have Jamie to just like pull it up on screen for us, do we?
Where's Jamie? God damn you.
That's what we need.
You'd think there'd be some Jamie around somewhere that could do this.
I mean, whiteboard at the beach would be interesting.
Yeah, like, I think
Cool.
that works.
Yeah. Awesome.
All
Should
right.
we wrap there?
Let's call it there then. So should we? I mean, maybe we should summarize a little bit. So
Okay.
next episode we'll get into the value trap, but we set out today to talk about the business model of AI. I think we've taken a nice little ramble around various different subjects that are interesting. But broadly speaking, the business model of AI, I think I would say, is traditional business. It's hyper-local, small business that is going to take advantage of this in a
Yes.
way that other businesses can't. So think about where you define your own value, and then think about how you can automate that and bring the costs way down. And if you can do that, you have something just very, very valuable.
Yeah, it's almost like we spent the last 2 decades searching for product market fit, and it turned out the valuable thing was just to stick with the companies that already had it.
Yeah, that's a great point. This is like venture returns on businesses that already have product market fit. Yeah, like it's almost like a home run every time. Like, I think, again, another reason why I think capital allocators are gonna be all over this.
They're gonna love it. Awesome.
All right,
All right.
let's call it that.
Let's wrap that.
That's the good stuff.